Question number 5, the Honourable Annette.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Is he satisfied his response to the childhood obesity epidemic is fit for purpose, and if so, why?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Yes, tackling the issue of obesity is a key priority for this government. That's why we launched the Childhood Obesity Plan with a range of interventions across government, the private sector, communities, schools and families. The package has 3 focus areas made up of 22 initiatives dealing with food, the environment and being active at each stage of life, starting during pregnancy and early childhood. Development of this initial package drew on recent New Zealand and international evidence, including the interim report from the World Health Organisation's Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity. A technical advisory group also provided advice to the Ministry of Health on evidence for effective interventions and targets.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
If the initiatives his government have put in place to reduce childhood obesity since 2009, including dumping tuck shop food guidelines, have worked, why has obesity in children aged between 2 and 14 increased from 8.3% to almost 11% under this government's watch?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
Well, the member
Coleman.
needs to remember this is a long-term challenge. Governments across the world are facing up to the issue, but it's not an easy one to turn around, and I welcome her constructive comments in the wider debate.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
If he backs his recently announced New Zealand health strategy, which states it focuses on evidence-based initiatives, will he now adjust his 22-point plan following research from Auckland University, which said his plan, quote, was just business as usual and unlikely to make a difference?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I will be backing our plan and I don't intend to readjust it, unlike Mrs King, who last November ruled out a sugar tax and recently has said actually they might do a sugar tax.
Why don't you answer your own question?
Order.
Why don't you answer it?
Order, because this is a chance for the opposition to ask ministers questions.
Well, I thought so, Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Annette King, supplementary question.
If he believes in an evidence-based approach, will he heed the warning from Consumer New Zealand and public health experts who say the star rating model he is promoting is flawed, misleading parents into thinking they're giving their children healthy breakfast food when it's loaded with sugar?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I haven't seen those comments from Consumer New Zealand, but what I can tell you is that the Health Star rating has had an interim assessment, and we're going to have a full assessment in 2019, and we're constantly looking at ways in which we can make sure that we turn this problem around. But rather than criticism, I think Mrs King should get on board and come up with something constructive.
Mr Speaker, plenty if you want me to table it.
No, well, I'll be interested in the supplementary question. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Is Healthy Families, a program that was brought over from Australia, a success when so far they have spent $14 million with one provider collapsing, and their main project appears to be implementing water-only policies in schools, something that could have been done for nothing if the government had been prepared to show some courage and commitment?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
Mr Speaker,
Coleman.
I'm very pleased that the member brought up Healthy Families, and I invite her to come with me to visit any of those 10 programs in places like West Auckland, where they're trying to get their polling rate above 26%, places like Invercargill, which used to be a Labor stronghold, because there's a lot of good stuff that's going on there. Places like the East Coast, where of course no one votes Labor anymore, but she should come and see the wide variety of initiatives brought into by communities which used to vote Labor.
Order. We don't need that as part of the answer. Question. Order.